Hello, channel family. What I'm about to tell you today changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. Today, you're going to see how I got my revenge in the best way possible on a man who used a fake miracle to destroy my life and my ministry. He thought he had silenced me, but he had no idea that my past held the key to his downfall. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 48 years old, and I was the pastor of a small Adventist church in a town called Esperanza Springs. It all started on what was supposed to be a day of unity. I was invited to a community faith day in the town square. The event was organized by Ricardo Montero, the most powerful man in town. He was a wealthy businessman and a very traditional Catholic who saw my small but growing church as a threat. He smiled at me, shook my hand, and led me to believe we were there as brothers in Christ. That was my first mistake. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? On stage, with the whole town watching, Montero asked me about my faith's view on the Virgin Mary. I knew it was a loaded question in a town that revered her, so I answered honestly but respectfully. I explained that while we honor Mary as the mother of our Lord, our worship is directed only to God the Father and His Son, Jesus. I spoke from the heart, trying to build a bridge of understanding. But Montero wasn't interested in understanding. He twisted my words, his voice booming across the square. "Do you hear him?" he shouted. "He blasphemes the Holy Mother in the heart of our town." His words were like a lit match. And right at that moment, as if on cue, the giant stone statue of the Virgin Mary in the center of the square began to cry. Thick, oily tears rolled down its stone cheeks. The crowd gasped, then roared. A wave of shock and anger washed over the people. They saw it as a sign from heaven. Montero pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a mask of fake piety and triumph. "Behold," he screamed, "heaven itself weeps at your heresy. You are cursed." In an instant, I went from a guest to a villain. The community event turned into a mob, and I had to be escorted away by the police just to escape being physically attacked. The fallout was swift and brutal. The miracle of Esperanza Springs became national news, and I was cast as the heretic who made a statue weep. That very night, someone threw rocks through the windows of my church. A week later, it burned to the ground. The official report called it an electrical fault. But I knew it was arson. Everyone in town knew, but no one would say a word. It was a message. My congregation, a small group of good, faithful people, was terrified. Their neighbors turned on them, their kids were bullied at school, and some even lost their jobs. One by one, they came to me, tears in their eyes, saying they had to leave. My church, which I had spent years building, dissolved in a matter of days. My family and I lost our home, too, since it was church property. We were ruined. The humiliation was the worst part. We had to pack our lives into our old car and leave town. As we drove away, people jeered and even threw garbage at us. I turned on the car radio, only to hear Ricardo Montero giving an interview, piously talking about the blessed town of Esperanza Springs, while my name was dragged through the mud. That cold, calculated lie had destroyed everything I held dear. My faith in God never wavered, but my faith in humanity was shattered. I felt a cold, quiet anger settle deep in my soul. It wasn't just about my lost church or my reputation. It was about a holy truth being twisted by a profane lie. Montero had used God's name to commit a fraud, and I couldn't let it stand. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't over. Before I answered the call to become a pastor, my life was very different. I lived in a world of logic, formulas, and precise calculations. I was a chemical engineer, specializing in things most people never think about. I thought I had left that life far behind me. But as I drove away from Esperanza Springs, a new kind of prayer formed in my heart. I realized God had given me those old skills for a reason, for this very moment. Montero's miracle was a lie, and I was one of the few people on earth with the exact knowledge to prove it. My name's Elias Vance. I'm 48 years old, and my life was destroyed by a lie wrapped in a miracle. It happened in front of an entire town, orchestrated by a man who smiled at me like a brother, while sharpening the knife he would use to stab me in the back. He used a holy symbol to commit a profane act of fraud, turning my community against me and burning my life's work to the ground. He thought he had silenced me forever. He was wrong. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? It all began at a so-called Community Faith Day in the town square of Esperanza Springs. The event was the brainchild of Ricardo Montero, the wealthiest and most powerful man in town. He was a pillar of the traditional Catholic Church and saw my small but growing Adventist congregation as a weed in his perfect garden. He invited me on stage, shook my hand for the cameras, and then, with a microphone broadcasting to hundreds, he put me on the spot. He asked me, in front of a town that revered her, what my faith taught about the Virgin Mary. I knew it was a trap, but my faith calls for honesty. I answered respectfully, explaining that while we honor Mary as the mother of Jesus, our worship is reserved for God the Father and His Son alone. I spoke with a calm heart, hoping to foster understanding, but Montero wasn't interested in understanding. He turned to the crowd, his voice filled with false outrage, and twisted my words. "Do you hear him?" he boomed. "He blasphemes the Holy Mother in the heart of our town." His words were the cue for the real show to begin. At that exact moment, as if commanded by his voice, the giant stone statue of the Virgin Mary in the center of the square began to cry. Thick, oily tears streamed down its cold, stone face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a roar of anger. It was a perfectly timed, devilishly clever illusion. People fell to their knees. Others pointed at me with hatred in their eyes. They didn't see a trick. They saw a sign from God, and I was the heretic who had caused it. Montero's face was a mask of triumph and fake piety. He pointed a trembling finger at me and screamed, "Behold, heaven itself weeps at your heresy. You are cursed." In that instant, I was no longer a pastor or a neighbor. I was a villain. The shock was like a physical blow, leaving me speechless as the crowd's mood turned ugly. The event turned into a mob, and I had to be rushed away by the police just to escape the fury that Montero had unleashed. That moment was the end of my old life, and the beginning of a war he had no idea he was starting. The night after the miracle, the rocks came. The sound of shattering glass from our church's beautiful stained glass windows was like a gunshot in the quiet night. My wife and I held each other, listening as the heart of our ministry was violated. We called the police, but they took their time arriving. When they did, they took a quick report, their faces impassive. They didn't have to say it. I knew they saw us as the problem, not the victims. It was the first bitter taste of what was to come. The town that had once welcomed me now looked at me with a mixture of fear and contempt. A trip to the grocery store became an ordeal. People would stop talking when I entered an aisle. Mothers would pull their children closer, and old friends would suddenly find something fascinating to look at on a shelf to avoid my eyes. I wasn't Pastor Vance anymore. I was the heretic, the man who made the Virgin Mary weep. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on me everywhere I went. A week later, I got the call that turned my world to ash. The church was on fire. I rushed over, but it was too late. Flames were devouring the building I had poured my life into, the place where babies were dedicated and souls were saved. I stood there, helpless, watching it all burn. The fire chief, a man I'd shared coffee with just a month before, put a hand on my shoulder and told me it was likely a faulty wire. We both knew it was a lie, a convenient story to close the book on the town's dirty secret. The destruction of the church was a signal to my congregation. They were good people, but they were scared. The Martin family, who owned a small bakery, found their windows smashed and heretic lovers spray-painted on their wall. Their business, which had served the town for 2 generations, dried up overnight. They came to me, their faces etched with fear and sorrow, to tell me they had to leave Esperanza Springs for the sake of their children. I couldn't blame them. I just hugged them and prayed for their safety. They weren't the only ones. One by one, my flock was scattered. A mechanic lost his job at the town's main garage. A teacher was put on administrative leave under vague pretenses. The pressure was immense, a silent, coordinated campaign to choke us out. My role as a pastor shifted from leading a congregation to counseling families as they packed up their lives to flee. Each goodbye was another piece of my heart being torn away, another failure laid at my feet. Without a church building or a congregation, we lost our home. The house was church property, and with the church officially dissolved, the bank sent a cold, formal eviction notice. We had 30 days to vacate. My wife, Sarah, tried to be strong, but I would find her crying silently in the kitchen, mourning the life we had built. We had to pack our memories into cardboard boxes, each one a testament to how quickly everything could be taken away by a single, well-orchestrated lie. The humiliation was relentless. I tried to find any kind of work to support my family, but my name was poison in that town and the surrounding areas. The story of the weeping miracle had spread like a virus. I was turned away from jobs I was overqualified for, with polite but firm rejections. I, a man with a master's degree, ended up taking cash jobs for day labor, loading trucks for a fraction of what I needed to survive, just to put food on the table. Our last day in Esperanza Springs was the lowest point of my life. As we drove our packed car down Main Street, a small crowd had gathered. They didn't just watch us leave. They celebrated it. Some pointed and laughed. A teenager threw a half-eaten apple that splattered against my windshield. Ricardo Montero had not just defeated me. He had turned me into a spectacle, a monster being run out of town. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, trying not to let my children see the tears in my eyes. As we drove further away, I turned on the radio, desperate for a distraction. And there he was. Ricardo Montero's smooth, confident voice filled the car. He was giving an interview about the blessed town of Esperanza Springs and its renewed faith since the miracle. He spoke of unity and divine favor, while the man he had destroyed was fleeing with his family, covered in the town's garbage. The hypocrisy was so profound it almost made me laugh. It was a cold, calculated evil dressed in the robes of piety. We ended up at a small, run-down apartment 2 states away. The shame followed us. We had no community, no friends, and very little money. The kids had to start a new school where they knew no one. Sarah took a job as a waitress, working double shifts until her feet were swollen and sore. I found work at a chemical supply warehouse, a bitter irony. I was surrounded by the building blocks of the modern world, yet my own life was in ruins. For months, I was lost in a fog of despair. My prayers felt like they were hitting a brass ceiling. I never doubted God's existence, but I began to doubt His justice. How could He allow such a monstrous lie to prosper while my family suffered? I read my Bible, searching for answers, but the words felt hollow. The anger in my heart was a cold, hard stone that I couldn't seem to dislodge. It was a righteous anger, but it was eating me alive. I watched Montero from afar, thanks to the internet. He was thriving. The miracle of Esperanza Springs had made him a national figure. He was launching a massive resort and wellness center near the town, built on the fame of the weeping statue. Investors were lining up. He was being hailed as a man of faith and vision, a pillar of his community. Every picture of him smiling, shaking hands with politicians, felt like a fresh stab in my back. The turning point didn't come in a flash of lightning or a booming voice from heaven. It came quietly, in the dead of night, in our cramped apartment. I was staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, thinking about the oily tears on that statue. Montero had called it a miracle. But I knew it wasn't. It was an effect. It was a product of a process, and processes were something I understood better than almost anyone. Before I was Pastor Vance, I was Elias Vance, chemical engineer. I had spent 15 years of my life in a world of formulas, reactions, and molecular structures. I designed systems that delivered precise amounts of fluid to specific places at specific times. I worked with compounds that could change their viscosity based on temperature, things that could absorb moisture from the air, things that could stain stone. I had left that world behind for the ministry, thinking it was a closed chapter. Suddenly I saw it. I saw the lie not as a spiritual attack, but as a technical problem. The oily tears weren't a mystery to me. I could think of a dozen ways to make a statue cry on cue. Glycerin mixed with a specific oil to get the right viscosity and slow evaporation rate. A microfluidic delivery system, powered by a small, silent pump, hidden within the statue itself. Tubing no thicker than a fishing line, drilled through the porous stone. It was all there, a clear blueprint in my mind. A new kind of energy surged through me, pushing out the despair. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was purpose. My faith wasn't shattered, it was being reforged. I finally understood. God hadn't abandoned me, He hadn't been silent. He had given me the tools to fight this battle long before it ever began. My past wasn't a forgotten chapter, it was my hidden weapon. Ricardo Montero thought he had silenced a simple pastor. He had no idea he had awakened an engineer. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies, a cheap chemical trick dressed up as a divine act. And I, the man he had crushed, was perhaps the only person on earth who possessed the exact knowledge to tear that foundation down, piece by piece. My fall wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his. I looked over at my wife sleeping, her face etched with worry even in her dreams. I thought of my children, who had lost their home and their friends. The cold stone of anger in my gut began to burn hot. It was no longer about my own pain or my lost reputation. It was about reclaiming the truth. Montero had used a holy symbol to commit a profane fraud. He had manipulated the faith of thousands for his own power and profit. This was not just an injustice against me, it was an offense against God. And the Bible is very clear about things done in the dark. Luke chapter 8 verse 17 says, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." I sat down at our small kitchen table and opened an old textbook I had kept from my engineering days. The familiar equations and diagrams felt like old friends. For the first time in months, I wasn't just praying for deliverance. I was starting to formulate a plan for a very different kind of sermon. The man in the warehouse uniform was gone. The broken pastor was gone. Sitting at that table, a new man began to emerge, forged in the fires of humiliation and armed with a unique combination of faith and science. My path was no longer about rebuilding what I had lost. It was about exposing the weeping fraud for the entire world to see. Montero had made a statue weep with oil and glycerin. I would make him weep with the truth. My fight for justice had just begun, and I knew it would be a long and difficult road. But for the first time since leaving Esperanza Springs, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the gentle hope of a prayer. It was the sharp, focused hope of a man with a mission. My name is Elias Vance. My life was destroyed by a lie. But my old life, the one I thought I had left behind, was about to become the instrument of my revenge. I wasn't just going to expose Ricardo Montero. I was going to use his own methods against him, turning his spectacle of lies into a theater of truth. He had no idea what was coming. Ricardo Montero saw me as a simple pastor. In his mind, I was a man of hymns and sermons, someone who dealt in faith, not facts. He thought that by destroying my church and my reputation, he had removed me from the board entirely. He never imagined that, before I was called to serve God in the pulpit, I served him in a laboratory. He saw a shepherd, but he was about to be cornered by a scientist. His greatest mistake was assuming my knowledge was limited to the pages of the Bible. My hidden resource wasn't money or a powerful connection. It was 15 years of my life spent as a chemical engineer. I had designed and managed microfluidic systems, the kind that deliver precise amounts of liquid through impossibly small channels. I had formulated compounds for specific tasks, creating reactions that were predictable, controllable, and to the untrained eye, almost magical. Montero's weeping statue wasn't a miracle to me. It was a puzzle I already knew how to solve. While working my dead-end job at the chemical supply warehouse, surrounded by the very building blocks of modern industry, the fog of my despair finally lifted. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at the barrels and containers not as a reminder of my fall, but as an arsenal. I knew the exact hygroscopic compounds that could draw moisture from the air, and the oils that would give it the right viscosity to look like tears. I knew everything he had likely used. Montero's arrogance was my greatest ally. He was so confident in his lie and my defeat that he never bothered to look into my past. A simple background check would have revealed my master's degree in chemical engineering, my patents, my publications. But why would he? To him, I was just a spiritual rival, a nuisance to be swatted away. He saw a man of faith, not a man of formulas. He underestimated me completely, and that was the opening God gave me. I realized this wasn't just about personal revenge. It felt like a divine assignment. God had allowed me to be stripped of everything so I could see the path He had laid for me all along. My past wasn't a life I had left behind. It was a specific skill set, a gift He had given me for this very moment. My mission was no longer just to clear my name, but to defend His. I was going to use the logic and reason He blessed me with to expose a profane lie told in His name. My plan began to form, not in anger, but with the quiet precision of an engineer designing a system. I spent my nights in the public library, using their computers to dig into Montero's business empire. I wasn't just looking for financial dirt. I was looking for technical connections. I searched for contractors, stonemasons, and hydraulic specialists who had worked in Esperanza Springs around the time the statue was restored, just before the miracle. It took weeks of cross-referencing shell corporations and business licenses, but I found it. A small, specialized plumbing company called Precision Flow Systems had been hired for a private fountain restoration on Montero's property a month before the event. Digging deeper, I found that the company was owned by Montero's brother-in-law and specialized in installing custom, remote-controlled irrigation systems. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place. My knowledge wasn't just for deconstruction, it was for construction. I couldn't just tell people Montero was a fraud. I had to show them. I needed to beat him at his own game. He had created a spectacle of lies, so I would have to create a spectacle of truth. The idea began to form in my mind. A counter-miracle, one so undeniable it would force everyone to see the truth behind the original. Of course, I was broke. I had no lab, no equipment, and no money. But my job at the warehouse gave me access to something valuable. Knowledge. I saw the supply chains, the manufacturers, the wholesale prices. I started taking on side work, using my expertise to help small companies streamline their chemical processes. It was small money, but it was a start. I was slowly building a war chest, one consultation at a time. This secret work also rebuilt my confidence. I was no longer just Elias Vance, the disgraced pastor. I was a problem solver, an expert in my field. People were paying me for my mind again. Each small success was a step out of the darkness, a reminder of the man I was before Montero tried to destroy me. I was sharpening the weapon that had grown dull during my years in the ministry. My ultimate advantage was that Montero believed he was playing checkers with a novice, while I was setting up a chessboard for a grandmaster. His trick was a one-time event, static and crude. My plan would be dynamic, a live demonstration of scientific principles disguised as something more. He relied on blind faith, but I would rely on observable, repeatable facts. I would use his own stage to perform my final act. I began to change my appearance. I let my hair grow out a bit, started wearing more professional, secular clothes, and bought a pair of non-prescription glasses. I was slowly erasing Pastor Vance and creating a new identity, a man who could walk back into Montero's world without being recognized. I was becoming a ghost from a past he didn't even know I had, preparing to haunt his fraudulent empire. During this time, my prayers changed. I no longer asked God why this had happened to me. Instead, I prayed for wisdom, for precision, and for courage. I repeatedly read Luke chapter 8, verse 17, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. It was no longer a lament, it was a promise, a divine guarantee that my plan was righteous. Montero's entire new enterprise, his resort and his fame, was built on the foundation of that weeping statue. He had chained himself to his lie. He had to keep defending it, celebrating it, and promoting it. This was his critical vulnerability. I knew that if I could publicly and spectacularly prove that one miracle was a fraud, the entire structure of his success would collapse like a house of cards. My fall from grace had been swift and public. His would be too, but it wouldn't be because I threw a rock or started a fire. It would be because I used the mind God gave me to shine a light so bright it would incinerate every shadow he was hiding in. The time for grieving was over. The time for planning was complete. Now it was time to return to Esperanza Springs and deliver my final sermon, not with scripture, but with science. Before I reveal how the revenge happened, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, YouTube will recommend this incredible story to more people, and you'll be helping us spread the gospel through real-life testimonies of faith and justice. So please, help us in this noble cause. The 2-year anniversary of my exile was the day I chose for my return. Montero was hosting a massive televised gala in the town square to celebrate the groundbreaking of his Miracle Oasis resort. He was at the absolute peak of his power, a celebrated visionary. I stood in the crowd, no longer Pastor Vance, but Mr. Cole, a potential investor. I felt no nerves, only a cold, serene focus. Every part of my plan was a gear in a complex machine, and in a few moments, I would turn the final key. I watched him on the stage, soaking in the applause, completely unaware that his world was about to be dismantled. As dusk settled over Esperanza Springs, the second act of my sermon began. On cue, the town's central fountain, which Montero had dedicated to the Weeping Virgin, began to change. The water started to shimmer, then glow with a soft, ethereal golden light. It was beautiful, captivating, and completely artificial. A wave of gasps and whispers swept through the crowd. I watched Montero. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in greedy calculation. He saw another blessing, another opportunity to cement his legend. He didn't see the trap he was walking right into. He seized the moment, just as I knew he would. Striding to the microphone, his voice thick with fake emotion, he declared it another sign from heaven. "Behold!" he roared to the cameras and the adoring crowd. God continues to bless our righteous work. He makes the very water glow with his favor. He was magnificent in his arrogance, weaving this new lie seamlessly into the old one. He was publicly claiming my creation as his own, tying his reputation to a spectacle I controlled completely. It was the perfect setup. As his speech swelled to a triumphant climax, I made my move. I walked calmly to a secondary microphone I had arranged for my investor presentation. The cameras swiveled to me, the mysterious Mr. Cole. I waited for a pause in the applause and spoke, my voice clear and steady, amplified across the entire square. Miracles are truly beautiful, Mr. Montero, but this one has a scientific name, chemiluminescence. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Montero's smile faltered for the first time. On the massive screen I had rented, which loomed behind the stage, my presentation began. It wasn't charts and figures, but a simple, clear video. It showed me in a lab, mixing 2 non-toxic chemicals that produced the exact golden glow, now illuminating the fountain. I explained the science in plain language, showing diagrams of the simple, timed release pump I had a contact install in the fountain's plumbing the night before. The crowd's awe turned to puzzled silence. They were watching a magic trick being explained. Before the whispers could turn into accusations, the screen changed. The final part of my plan unfolded with brutal efficiency. A certified lab report appeared, showing the chemical analysis of the original statue's tears, a mundane mixture of glycerin and olive oil. It was followed by engineering blueprints of the statue itself, highlighting the microtubing drilled through the stone head. Then came the final, irrefutable proof. Bank transfers and invoices connecting the shell company that installed the tubing directly to one of Ricardo Montero's own corporations. A stunned silence fell over the square, broken only by the sound of 100 phones buzzing as investors began to pull out. On live television, Ricardo Montero was exposed not as a man of God, but as a blasphemous fraud. He stood frozen, his face a ghastly white, as the empire he built on a lie crumbled around him. I didn't need to shout. I let the truth do the work. I simply stated my real name for the cameras, and as the crowd's shock turned to righteous fury, I looked at the man who had ruined me and said, God's truth does not need a lie to defend it. Then I turned and walked away, the sound of approaching sirens, a quiet confirmation that justice had finally been served.